Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Thursday, December the 5th. I'm Zach Ewing with Koki Riley, just the two of us today. A little signing day recap for you. LSU, look, signing day has always been a monumental day in college football calendars, and you could make the argument, Koki, whether it's less important than it used to be because of the transfer portal and everything, but one thing is for certain, it ain't less boring. There are, between NIL and kids transferring out, and all of a sudden you have a need at this position that you didn't think you needed, and who's going to sign where. It is wall-to-wall news.
Yeah, wall-to-wall news. I mean, it's hard to even, where do we even begin, right? I guess really since Bryce Underwood's decision, it has just gone really up and down for LSU in the recruiting space ever since. And honestly, it's technically not even over. Like Brian Kelly said that they're going to have at least 25 freshmen in this year's class signed. Right now, they only have 23, so that means there's going to be two more names that come in. Not quite sure as to who those names are going to be. We have an idea as to maybe who one of them might be, but we'll get into that later. But yeah, either way, it's not even quite over yet. Even if again 90% of it is, there's still some breadcrumbs left to be had. So it's a crazy space. When you put money involved into really almost anything in life, things get crazy, right?
And not that there hasn't always been some money involved in these things. Yeah. It's just now that it's official and it can be more money and all
more like, public, and
it becomes, it's the Wild West, as people said it might be. So the early signing period actually does go through tomorrow. So there's, as you said, it's still a couple days, and then we get the transfer portal opening next week, and so things are really going to get crazy. Today's show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will dig into the way we're doing this, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there was all three for LSU on signing day. So that's what we're going to do right after this.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit ClassicIndustrial.com for more information.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love.
Okay, welcome back. You were going to ask me before the break, and you started talking during the break about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
So if you want to like just spiff on spaghetti westerns, go for it, man.
Yeah, the good and the bad and the ugly. Fantastic film. Everyone should go see it. Really, spaghetti westerns in general. It's kind of a lost art at this point. But really highly recommend all that stuff. Clint Eastwood. That's the good stuff right there.
They're like, they have these corny moments where you kind of want to cringe, but you also can't stop watching.
Exactly.
So good stuff. So that's what we went with, the good, the bad, and the ugly for LSU signing day. And I do think it needs to be said, Koki, like I know there's this sky is falling mentality around LSU football right now. You mentioned Bryce Underwood. They also had, and we'll talk about some of this, some other decommitments, some guys entering the transfer portal or, who weren't necessarily expected to. But it's not all bad. Like this class is actually pretty good. And it ended on a really good note with Solomon Thomas flipping from Florida State to LSU. And they had 3 top 25 national recruits. You add in Harlem Berry and DJ Pickett, the cornerback, which is the first time Brian Kelly's had 3 top 25 players in the same class. Like this is still a good class.
Yeah, it's definitely still a good class compared to, 95% of the other classes around college football. But at the same time, like it should be noted that the expectation at LSU is you're in and around the top 5. And they're not going to be in that. They're not going to be in the top 5. I think they have a chance to get up to number 6, depending on what happens with these last 1 or 2 spots. I think now's probably the right time to mention Bryce Baker. He's a 4-star quarterback who's still technically committed to UNC, but after Mac Brown was fired there, things seem to be a lot more open with his recruitment. He visited Penn State already. Reportedly, LSU's been in contact with him. And again, that's a quarterback, right? And we talked about their need for a quarterback for the future.
It's even a quarterback named Bryce.
Yeah, it's another quarterback named Bryce.
Filling a hole.
So it'd be interesting. And he's a high 4-star recruit. I'm pretty sure he's a top 100 player in the nation. So like that would be a pretty big haul if they were able to land him. I know Penn State needs a quarterback, so that's going to be a pretty tough battle with them if that's what it kind of comes down to, and even UNC, even with their coaching situation. So,
well, and we should mention here too, like we said, the signing period goes through Friday. You don't have to sign, especially if you're a top 100 kid, and schools will leave a spot open for you. You can wait till the traditional February period and sign.
And I think that's what he's going to do. I think he said he's not going to sign before the end of during the early signing period. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. So that's a name to definitely just at least keep an eye out for in terms of potentially filling those last 2 spots to get the 25. Kelly also said that they could get up to 27, but I really doubt that. But if they get the 25, I think like there's a chance that this quarterback it could play a big part in that.
So that's Bryce Baker. So we'll keep an eye on that over the next couple days and possibly couple months to see if he gets added to the class. But among the guys who did sign, the 23, 21 of them are 4 or 5 stars. Mm-hmm. There are the 2 5 stars. There's Solomon Thomas that we mentioned. There's also DJ Pickett, the corner. Talked about him a lot on Tuesday's podcast. Long corner, 6'4", very physical. A guy who could potentially come in and help LSU secondary right away.
Yeah, he is probably the headliner of this class, I'd say. Arguably the top corner in the country. Brian Kelly said it's not even close. He is the top corner in the country. I mean, how many 6'4" corners with crazy wingspans do you see? Those guys don't really grow off trees, right?
No.
So
usually you're that tall, you don't move that well.
Exactly.
But he does.
Apparently he does, at least. So that's a guy who could potentially be a starter for you on day one, just given the way this cornerback room is constructed at the moment. They have a lot of younger guys, but no one who really you can see stepping up into that starting role immediately as an immediate fit, because they're going to lose Alexander, right? So, like Alexander, Pickett's a big guy. He's even bigger than Alexander, and obviously the talent is there as probably the top cornerback in the nation. So it's an absolutely massive move, and it's why you bring back Corey Raymond to your program, to bring in guys like that.
Yeah, 100%. Then the other 5-star is Solomon Thomas, who flipped. Tell us a little bit about that saga. Obviously, Florida State went 1-11, had a terrible season. He flips. He said he had some weird comments after he signed yesterday, saying like, "I'm disappointed I couldn't go to Florida State," and I was waiting for. I mean, it very much sounded like he was saying I was waiting for a better offer to come in, and none did, and so I took the best one on the table, which was LSU. Not exactly a guy who bleeds purple and gold yet. Maybe he'll get there, but it's a weird commitment. I mean, regardless, you'll take a 5-star offensive lineman any day of the week.
It seemed like, according to the recruiting gurus, that he was very firmly committed in with Florida State, even as they were losing games and whatnot. It was when Alex Atkins was fired, and then that kind of makes sense, right? Because Atkins is not only the offensive coordinator there, he's also the offensive line coach. He's known to be a very good recruiter. I imagine that he was a massive part in Thomas's recruitment, and once he was out the door, it really put things in the flux and really opened the door for a team like LSU to sort of swoop in there. Between LSU, Florida, and Florida State, LSU won out at the end of the day, and that's just absolutely massive, because you bring in another 5-star recruit to this offensive line. And one thing, you can say a lot of things about Brad Davis, but one thing you can't argue is the fact that this guy knows how to recruit. He brings in high-level talent on the offensive line. He kept Will Campbell in State. He kept Emory Jones in State. He brought in Weston Davis in last year's class. He brought in Lance Hurd, even though they weren't able to keep him. I think that was kind of outside of Brad Davis's control a little bit. So, and now you add in a guy like Solomon Thomas to go along with others, for example, Carius Kern, who Brian Kelly mentioned that he could be a starter on day one because he's that strong. But now you bring in Thomas, who signed after the press conference, so we don't really have any comments from Kelly on him. Maybe he's a starter on day one for this team. Who knows? Because they're going to have to rebuild a lot of this offensive line because they're going to lose at least 3 starters and possibly up to 4, depending on what Emory Jones does.
The third guy that we need to mention, speaking of keeping guys in state, and that's Harlem Berry, who top all-purpose running back in the country, top player in the state. Some services do have him as a 5-star. Going by 24/7, he's a 4-star. But regardless, very good player, very good running back, and a guy from St. Martin's that the Tigers were able to keep home.
Yeah, I actually went to his recruitment, to his commitment ceremony yesterday at St. Martin's in New Orleans, and got to talk to him, got to talk to his folks, and it was really interesting as to how they sort of saw the recruiting process and were very open about how little NIL had to do with their ultimate decision. But his father did sort of mention how important NIL, how it was good to have this NIL experience now for when he potentially becomes an NFL player. They're used to talking with agents, talking contracts, going through understanding the business side of sports, right? And he very openly acknowledged how that was a good thing. The only problem being, and he said this as well, these are 16, 17-year-olds having to make these potentially life-changing financial decisions, and that's just a lot to put on a kid that age. So there's drawbacks and there's good things about it, but at the end of the day, he wanted to come here, and he probably, I would assume he had money offers elsewhere, as we'll talk about with some other guys who made a different decision. But he decided to stay at LSU. So that's absolutely massive. The Tigers, doing him and JT Lindsey, they've kind of remade their running backs room with John Emery and Josh Williams now out the door.
Yeah, and obviously Caden Durham had a great freshman season, so he's going to lead that charge going into next year, but position where you always need depth. So good signings for the Tigers. We're not going to go through every single recruit. A lot of these guys, it just the way of the beast in college football. In 2 years, half of these guys will have transferred out. Another half of them, of what's remaining will probably be buried on the depth chart. And then there's a few guys who are going to become stars at LSU. And the most likely are Berry and Pickett and Thomas. But, there's some other guys who could certainly become those stars and those starters and guys you get to watch on Saturdays. So kind of moving on here to, we had the good, the bad. And this is a weird one, but let's dig into the recruitment of Jakeem Morris.
Jakeem Stewart. Where'd I have Morris from? Jakeem Stewart, the Edna Carr defensive end, who reclassified. We'll talk about him on Tuesday too. Who reclassified from the class of 2026, where he was the number 1 player. Still a very highly ranked player in the class of 2025. Obviously very young. Still a lot of developing to do. Only played in 10 high school games, 11 high school games, I think, his entire career. He commits to USC, chooses them over LSU. For a long time, it looked like when he reclassified, Jakeem Stewart was coming to LSU. That was the reason he reclassified. He had relationships with people who were going to steer him in that direction. But USC wins out. You talk about the NIL, that was probably a factor here. But just a very strange recruitment that does not go LSU's way. Yeah, extremely strange given how highly rated this kid was, despite the fact that he only played in 11 high school games. It's just absolutely mind-blowing, and it tells you how powerful the camp circuit is and the 7-on-7 stuff, even though he wasn't really doing 7-on-7 stuff because he's a defensive lineman, and all these sort of off-season camps and summer showcases, which is something you talk about more with baseball. It's definitely comes into play with football because that's really where people got the best look at this guy. He's a massive kid. I saw him in person yesterday at his recruitment at his ceremony, commitment ceremony, and he's a big kid. It's unbelievable that he's just a junior in high school because you can definitely see it just physically why everyone in the country wanted him. But as you mentioned with USC, there's the NIL stuff, obviously. But there's also the fact that, USC's defensive line coach is from New Orleans, and there's kind of that, there actually is a bit of a Louisiana connection there. So, it's going to be really interesting to see like how his sort of career develops after this. I'm not quite sure how, ready he's going to be to, help out the Trojans in year one. Maybe they need him to help out in year one because of the state of their roster right now. But we'll see. He's going to have a very fascinating career to sort of keep track of because it's already gotten off to a wild start.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And defensive line, offensive line are the hardest places to make an impact immediately for a freshman, and especially when he's only played 11 high school games, as we mentioned. So he could play his first game in 2 years in US. I don't know who they play in their opener next year, but USC is, you're talking about like playing Big Ten games after 11 high school games. It's not going to be easy. I did hear at least one local media member in New Orleans yesterday, and I won't say who, is like, and I'm kind of glad we don't have to deal with that for the next 4 years. I also think there's a chance this is definitely one who, if things don't pan out in LA over the next year or two, LSU may get another bite at the apple here. I mean, this is a kid you could see. He changed high schools twice. He's, reclassifying. He's doing all these things. You could definitely see him in the transfer portal down the road.
Yeah, and I mean, it's already worked for LSU with Aaron Anderson, for example, right? You lose out on Aaron Anderson when he was a high school recruit. He actually was committed to LSU, and then he flips to Alabama after the coaching change here. And then he spends just 1 year at Alabama, doesn't love it there, and comes back home, and now he's probably going to be one of your best receivers, if not your best receiver next season. So you have to be able to maintain these relationships even if you lose out in the initial recruiting process, and they've been able to do that a couple times, even outside of Anderson. I'm blanking on it right now, but it's something that is pretty important, and it's become a new aspect to recruiting, a much smaller aspect compared to the NIL stuff, but it is a new wrinkle because of the transfer portal.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, so that's kind of the bad for LSU. We're going to get into the ugly. We're going to take our second break first, but things just kind of went haywire for LSU this week, and I think that's why, even though they signed a Todd Thin class, and even though they got a 5-star flipping to them, things kind of feel off around LSU's campus. So we'll talk about that after this break when we come back.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Going through signing day, went through the good and the bad. Koki, now we have the ugly, and it maybe isn't fair to call it ugly because this is something that happened. Like people need to realize this happens at basically every college football program in America. Even the Alabamas and Georgias have players transfer out. But LSU had maybe a few more than you would think already enter the portal, and the portal's not even officially open yet. One of them in particular, C.J. Daniels, who we did not. Brian Kelly came out and said it last week. C.J. Daniels is going to be returning. We're looking forward to that.
C.J. Daniels said C.J. Daniels was going to return.
And then all of a sudden he's in the transfer portal. Technically, he could still come back. Technically, he could withdraw his name from the portal. Typically, if you put your name in, there's a reason you put your name in. So we'll see what happens, and then combine that with the other signing day part of this is Cade Phillips, the other top corner that LSU signed along with DJ Pickett. Cade Phillips flips his commitment to Texas, and LSU loses a highly ranked corner at a position of need. Things went a little haywire for the Tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you combine that with Deshaun Womack hitting the portal, and Derek Meadows flipping his commitment from LSU to Alabama, and it just kind of just created this sort of sense of things unraveling. And you felt that a little bit even after you felt that maybe this could happen after the Bryce Underwood situation. We've talked about him ad nauseum at this point. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Like the Phillips thing is absolutely huge. Like I want to touch on that because that was a position of major need for you, and you could have had potentially, two major contributors who were, just true freshmen at corner next season with him and Pickett. But to lose his commitment is a pretty big deal. And not saying Aiden Anding isn't a really good player. He's the number one corner in Louisiana, so he is a good player. But it would have really helped to had Cade Phillips in there. But to lose him out on the last hour, likely because of, it seems like it was because of NIL, that's a tough pill to swallow if you're LSU.
Okay, and that brings us to Brian Kelly's comments during his signing day press conference, where he referenced NIL and basically came out and said that LSU is lagging behind in that department among the schools that they think are their peers, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Auburns, the Texas A&M, and that without more contributions, LSU is going to continue. And Brian Kelly kind of decried the whole process, like, hey, I hate that this is the way it is, that kids go to the highest bidder, but with a lot of them, that's the case, and that's life, and we have to be able to deal with it. And he caught a lot of criticism for that comment. I mean, he's right. It is a little bit unfortunate that you just have kids going out to the highest bidder now, but he's also right in saying that that's life, and that's what LSU has to deal with now. So what did you make of his comments, and where do you think this leaves LSU in recruiting going forward?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, I agree with the message, but maybe not from the messenger, in the sense that this is also a guy who left Notre Dame for LSU for some extra chunk of change,
Pretty big chunk of change.
Yeah, for a pretty big chunk of change as well. So not in saying he did it solely because of money, but it wasn't nothing. So like I think that should be at least mentioned here, right? Mm-hmm. But he is right in the sense that like money is just absolutely massive in these decisions now. Now it's not about just creating good relationships with the kids. Like that gets you in the building, creating those relationships. That's how you get the initial commitment. And they did a really good job of building those relationships this year and getting those commitments from so many high profile guys. I mean, it wasn't just Bryce Underwood and Cade Phillips they lost. I mean, they had Decorian Moore committed here for a while at one point. He's a top receiver in the country. At one point, they had the number one receiver, the number one quarterback, and number one running back in the country all committed to this year's class, and that's why people were so excited about it heading into the season in the first place. And then at the end of the day, you only keep the running back. You add DJ Pickett, sure. You were able to fend him off from some of these other schools. Maybe NIL was a factor there that actually helped LSU sort of fend them off. And I say that partially because Brian Kelly was just so effusive in his praise of Pickett yesterday. But still, at the end of the day, like money is just absolutely massive, and it's hard to really blame these kids when that amount of money is getting thrown at you in these families, right? Because like if you and I were in that situation and a school said, here's $2 million to go to school, you can come to school here to play football, it's hard to say no, right? And that's how, and when you add agents into the mix and and all that sort of stuff, it gets really, really tough, especially when there's a lot of good schools and a lot of good programs out there, and Harlan Berry's father talked about this. Like it gets really tough to sort of differentiate these schools sometimes, and sometimes money can be the differentiator.
I think the long and the short of it is Brian Kelly has paid a lot of money to figure this out.
Yeah.
This is the reality. We can have a whole discussion on whether it's a good reality or a bad reality. I think there's a lot of things about it that need fixing. College football in general jumped into the NIL era kind of without looking almost, and didn't know that there might have been a sharp rock underneath the surface of the water there. Like you don't know exactly what, and now that like, Pandora's box is open, you can't close it again, sort of thing. You don't put the toothpaste back in the tube, all those cliches. But you have to figure it out. Now, Brian Kelly's paid a lot of money to figure this out. The coaches who succeed in the new landscape of college football are the ones who are going to be able to adapt and be able to continue to recruit not just high school players, but then transfers, and then recruiting your own roster becomes very important too, where you've got to keep guys here, which we've seen the downside of that this week. And by the way, let me use that opportunity to say that Monday's show, we're going to talk about the transfer portal. It's a whole episode on targets LSU may have, guys that are going to lose. What we may know more on Monday. So we're focused on signing day here, but there will be a whole transfer portal episode coming. Brian Kelly's got to figure this out, or ultimately he will not succeed in Baton Rouge. Yeah,
absolutely. It's the name of the game, and he says it. Everyone else says it nationally, locally, fans. This is just the reality of the situation, and part of this isn't not everything. Not 100% of this is on him. He's responsible for obviously adapting and getting these kids onto campus. But LSU, he also needs the money to do that, right? And that's kind of the big question with this program outside of, that has nothing to do with Brian Kelly, but not as much to do with Brian Kelly. And it's that, does LSU have enough money to do this? Do they have the money to match in Oregon, to match a Michigan, to match a Texas? Like Texas I don't think Texas was in the top 10 in the recruiting rankings a month ago, and now they have the number 1 class. So I don't think, I don't know if 100% of that had to do with money, but money had something to do with it. I think that's very safe to say that. Like Michigan with the whole Bryce Underwood saga and the money that they very publicly spent on him. It's the question is whether LSU can raise the funds to sort of match what these other big programs and the big poker game, as Brian Kelly likes to say, can they actually be in that poker game, and I'm not saying that means that they have to win every single recruit. You're going to lose a couple of these guys. You just don't want to spend as much money on, but given the amount of guys that they lost out on this year, I think it's very safe to sort of ask that question.
Yeah, it is. And again, you've got to figure it out or you won't be here. I mean, people just aren't going to take that as an excuse because they have spent a lot of money on your salary. A lot of that money comes from boosters. So
exactly.
You've got to figure it out. And I don't feel like I'm being too harsh in saying that because that's just the reality of the situation. That's the pressure that Brian Kelly is under and his staff is under. And, I don't think they're doing a terrible job. Again, we talked about this at the beginning. They got the number 8 class in the country. Mm-hmm. Would you like that to be the number 1 or 2 or 3 class? Sure, you would. But if you're getting the number 8 class every year, you've got a chance to be in the college football playoff every year. I mean, that just tracks, right? That's just math. If you're bringing in some of the group of players that's considered among the 10 best, you should be among the 10 best teams, assuming you can coach them up a little bit. And that's what all LSU fans want, is for this team to be in the playoff and competing for national championships. So ultimately, Koki, was this week a step toward that goal or a step away from it in your book?
From a recruiting, I
put you on the spot there.
From like a purely recruiting standpoint, probably yes, for the reasons that you said. Like when you have a top 10 recruiting class, you should be at least in the college football playoff discussion every single year. If you're putting those top 10 recruiting classes every single year, and they've had a top 10 recruiting class every year, but the first season under Brian Kelly, and even in that year, you had plenty of high impact players from that very small class. Emory Jones, Will Campbell, Mason Taylor, Harold Perkins. It was actually a pretty remarkable class considering they only signed 13, 14 guys. And then, they had top 10 classes the last 3 years. So it's going to be, I think from that pure standpoint, yes. But if we're gonna add in losing CJ Daniels and losing some of the other portal
and go back to Bryce Underwood, I mean,
and if we go back to Bryce Underwood too, this was the last week or two has definitely been a step backwards. Yeah.
Okay. So we're again, this is just part of the offseason story. The transfer portal is coming. It's coming hard and it's coming fast, and there will be more changes, and we're going to talk about a lot of those on Monday. One more order of business to attend to today, and that is that this year's LSU team, those who opt in to play in the bowl game anyway, are going to find out where their final game is probably sometime Sunday afternoon after the college football playoff brackets announced. Looking at bowl projections, there's several places. For those who don't know, the way the SEC does this is obviously the top teams go to the playoff. The best team that doesn't get in the playoff, which right now I would say looks like Ole Miss or South Carolina, unless Alabama should fall out of the playoff field, maybe it's Alabama. That team goes to the Citrus Bowl. Then the next 6 teams, and LSU will be one of these 6 teams, along with, either Ole Miss or South Carolina, along with, I guess, Missouri, Florida, Arkansas. I'm trying to think. Maybe Arkansas is not because they're only 6-6. Some of these teams that went 7-5 or 8-4, like LSU, are going to be in this group of 6 teams, and the SEC kind of assigns them bowls. There's no pecking order. The one that they seem to be mentioned the most in this week is the Texas Bowl.
Yeah, that or the Music
City Bowl is the other.
So it's probably going to be one of those 2 bowls, and the Music City Bowl is against some Big Ten team, and the Texas Bowl is against some Big 12 team, and it's going to be hard to sort of figure out. The Music City Bowl would be fun though, because we potentially get the Bryce Underwood Bowl between LSU and Michigan in the Music City Bowl.
And as Scott Rabelais loves to mention, LSU's never played Michigan.
Yes.
So we'd have that aspect of it.
So you'd have that double whammy going if that happened. That'd probably be the most fun scenario, because they're not going to face Notre Dame this year, because Notre Dame is going to be in the playoffs. So, and obviously, the Brian Kelly Notre Dame thing would have been fun.
The Gator Bowl, I guess, or the Vegas Bowl are the other 2 you occasionally hear. Probably lesser possibilities. I think Gator Bowl's also a Big 10 team, and Vegas Bowl's also a Big 12 team.
Yeah.
Or possibly it'd be a West Coast team, put it that way.
Yeah.
I think they'd look for a school from the artist formerly known as the Pac-12 to play in that game.
Yeah. Rest in peace to the Pac-12.
So LSU could potentially begin its season in Vegas, end its season in Vegas. It could be country Vegas in Nashville, or it could be Houston. And I don't, the Texas Bowl's fine is drivable. Like, you don't want a lot of fans aren't going to want to travel a ton for a non-playoff bowl game. It's drivable. LSU was in it just a few years ago, but that was a weird. That was after the Ed Ogeron era. He had been fired. You had an interim coach. You didn't have a quarterback in that game. It was against Kansas State. It almost didn't count.
Jontre Kirkland was at quarterback.
Yeah, Jontre Kirkland played quarterback. It almost didn't count. So going back with like a real team and playing a real game might be kind of fun too.
Fun fact, Zach, that's the first LSU game I ever covered. That Texas Bowl.
That's
the first LSU football game I ever covered was that.
And probably the weirdest.
Texas, yeah, and maybe the weirdest. Either that or the next game I covered, which was the infamous LSU Florida State game in New Orleans, which had
also a
madness.
Weird game.
Yeah. So.
All right. So that's the bowl situation. We'll find that out Sunday. You can follow all the coverage from Koki and Wilson and all of our beat writers at theadvocate.com/LSU. In the meantime, subscribe to our YouTube channel, our LSU Sports at NOLA.com YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share with your friends, hit the bell for notifications, and 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, if you're listening that way, are also appreciated. Our thanks to our sponsors, Waste Pro, Baton Rouge Clinic, Classic Industrial Services, the Queen Casino of Baton Rouge, and I'm missing somebody, Associated Grocers. Thanks to them, too. Our producer is Robert Young today. He's Koki Riley. I'm Zach Ewing, and we'll see you Monday for a transfer portal episode, and we'll know the bowl game. See you then.